10 is a simple abstract game with a push or luck element, with an auction element. It is unusual to see abstract games these days are just about numbers between 1 and 9, but at least it's not an abstract game pretending to be about making beer in the Middle Ages or trading in the Mediterranean. So 10 is for 2 to 4 players. It revolves around a deck of cards. Of course, the more players you have, the more cards you're going to use. I played the game only with 2 players, myself and one of my kids, Lou, who is now 10, and they love the game, and we had a good time playing it. But it can feel a little fiddly to learn when you're reading the rulebook and to teach. But then when you start playing it, it really makes sense. So we have this deck of cards that includes different types of cards. The main card is these numerical cards here with these huge numbers. They go from 1 to 9, but the numbers are not all born equal, meaning there are more cards with lower values while the higher values are rarer. And we have 4 denominations, green, orange, pink, or purple, I guess, and then blue. As you can see, they're also marked by pattern. In the deck, we also have wild cards, such as this one. This one it can be used as a 5 of any denomination. Or maybe it's the number that is wild. This is an orange of any value. And in here, there are also some cards that are truly wild. They can be used as any card of any denomination. And then we have currency cards. They represent a number of black plastic tokens. I am only showing you the 5, but trust me, there are other numbers also. There you go. So, and they represent these plastic tokens here. Each black plastic token is worth 1 currency. The white tokens, we'll talk about it, those are the bust tokens. A modest consolation prize if you go bust. So you shuffle these cards together in a single deck, and then players will take turn being the active player. The active player will simply start drawing cards, and they can decide after each if they want to draw more or if they want to stop. And that continues until either they go bust or until they decide to stop, in which case they get a reward. To go bust, you go bust if your line of cards shows 11 currency symbols or more. So if you exceed 10 in currency, or if your number cards add up to 11 or more after you subtract the currency that is showing. So right now, 5 and 1 is 6, minus 4 is 2. My value of the cards is only 2. And so maybe I decide, if I draw a 9 here, that would be very annoying, but I decide to go again. That works. I add that to that line, and maybe I decide that I want to go again, and again, and booyah. And so you continue like this. What will be right now? I got 6, 8, and 10. No, yeah, 6, 8, and 10. So I'm still good, but I suppose that I decide to stop right there. If, as you draw a wild card, then actually the active player's turn is paused, and there is going to be immediately an auction. And starting with the player sitting to the next of the active player, to the left of the active player, each player can place 1 bid. You can pass or bid once, and you're bidding currency, which is again worth 1, bust tokens that you may have collected earlier, because if you go bust, you take one of these, and as a consolation prize, and they're worth 3 currency. Also, as the game progresses, you'll collect cards and they'll go in your tableau, and maybe some of those cards you don't need later, and so actually you can also discard cards from your personal tableau, and each is worth 1 currency. So when it's time to bid on the auction, again, it can be a mix of currency tokens, bust tokens worth 3, and cards worth 1. Player that has the highest bid takes the wild card, and suppose that here my kid Lou gets that, and so that's the idea. So if I go bust, the turn ends. There are a couple of other things that happen, but mainly the turn ends, and that's it, and you get the modest busted token as consolation prize. If I don't go bust, I can choose a reward. I can take any and all currency indicated here, in which case I take those tokens, and these cards are discarded. And the number cards are placed to the side to form a market. We'll see what that means. Or it may be that I decide instead of the currency to take the number cards, in which case all the other players collect the currency equal to an amount of currency that was showing in the line. And when I collect these cards, I'm going to place them in my personal area, dividing them by type. And actually having two cards that are exactly the same is completely useless, so this one I'm already thinking of it as a currency later to buy stuff. Because again, when people go bust or when people take currency, there are going to be cards after a while in the market. You also want to divide that by type. And during your turn, at the end of the turn, if you didn't go bust, you have a buy phase. So at the end of your turn, if you didn't go bust, you can spend, again, any combination of currency tokens, of bust tokens, of cards that you don't need to buy cards from the market. Each turn, the active player can buy exactly one, no more, and the cost is the printed value. To take this one, I need 4 total currency. This one 6. And it's as simple as that. So we're going to continue like this. And I know it sounds incredibly convoluted. There is even a flow chart. I don't know that many fillers come with a flow chart, but you really need this one. This flow chart is very effective in summarizing what I've been telling you so far, which is that the player draws cards. There may be auctions. They draw cards until they get a reward, and then they have a buy phase, and then return end until they go bust, and that's sad trombone for them. At the end of the game ends when the deck is exhausted. At that point, players will form lines of cards. You will score each of the 4 numerical denominations, and for each of them, you will score your longest consecutive line. So, for example, as this is the longest consecutive line I have for green, then green gives me 2 points, and that gives me 2 points also. Not super impressive, but wait, I got 3 for pink. Yay! This is also when you're gonna place your wilds. You don't have to commit your wilds until the end of the game. So simply put, for each of the 4 numerical denominations, you look at the longest consecutive line that you have. Each card in that consecutive line is worth 1 point. Add all of your points together. Highest score wins the game. So, as I was reading the rule book, I was pretty skeptical about the game because it seems so fiddly, so many little rules to remember, things that would work differently if people go bust one way or another, do things one way or another. And you saw the flow chart. There's just a lot that can go on in a filler that plays in 20-30 minutes. Then when I taught the game to my kid Lou, it was even worse because they were super confused. And I understand that. But then we started playing it, and well, what I cannot deny is that after a while the game clicks and feels pretty smooth, and it flows well. And you know, there is the big collection of games that I have here in my game room, and here I store the games that are more likely to play by myself, solitaire late at night, or that I'm more likely to play game night with my adult friends. And then there's a smaller stash in the house of the games that I'm more likely to play with my family. And Lou already asked me, hey, when you're done filming the review, can you bring it back and we keep it in the collection in the house? So I cannot deny that the kid has liked it, that this game has an audience, and that and I enjoy playing it in that setting. So I only play with 2 players, but keep it in the house. We may be able to convince also the older daughter. We may be able to convince mom. Who knows? But definitely, I said this more as a family game than a game night game. Because if you're playing with your group of hardcore friends, well, there are probably gonna be games that as fillers are smoother, are more thematic, or even if they're abstract, they just don't need a flowchart. And for heavier games, so well, there are a lot of other options. So it is a game that can be enjoyable. It is just it has pluses and minuses, and some games at this level don't. Well, some games only have the minuses, but some games have a lot more pluses. Some of the minuses, again, is stitching this game is surprisingly annoying and surprisingly confusing and complicated, while the general idea ultimately is pretty simple. On the plus side, the push or luck element can really be fun when it works, but it can also be that sometimes, fairly often, you're given a fairly obvious situation. That is, well, there is a card there, a single numerical card there that is pretty high. As the first one that came out is one that I need, or I see that you need, I'm gonna stop there and take it. That also ensures that there are no currency cards there, so you don't get any currency while I get the card. So if only currency comes out, or if only cards come out, or numbers come out, which is entirely possible, well, the push of luck is not quite there. At least it's not as interesting. Or again, one of the interesting elements here is that you get rewards out of turn, and that may work very well. The auction element, that also seems pretty cool, pretty interesting, but it just so happens that at least playing with two players, there's a lot of tension because you're usually going to, well, you're not going to have a lot of money to save for the auction and to buy cards in the market. So it very often happens that when the auction comes out, only one of the players had any money. And again, if we more players, well, there will be maybe 2 out of 3 that have just bought a card from the market. So now one player is 0, one player is 1, and one player is 5. Who's going to win? So the auction theoretically seems interesting, but again, if there isn't enough money to go around to take advantage of the market and to make the auction exciting. And then the luck element, the random element, is just pretty intense because you see, the fact that the rarest cards are the highest one, I guess, that's kind of like seems to make sense. It's intuitive. A 9 is more important than a 1. But a 5 is a lot more important than a 9, because if I'm missing that 5, then there isn't that sequence there cannot score more than 4. As opposed to, I may be missing an 8 and a 9, but I'm scoring from 1 to 7, and that's pretty good. It scores me more points. So I wonder if the game would have been differently if the rarer cards, so the ones that are really expensive, or that somehow are rarer in the deck, are the ones in the middle. And yes, it can come down to I needed a 5 of a certain denomination, and my opponents saw that and they took it right there. They didn't risk anything. They basically skipped a turn, but now they're killing 1/4 of my sources of points, and that can have an effect. So there are just all these little minuses here and there that they're just a little bit annoying. Again, when you do the balance, the pros and cons, the cost-benefit analysis, I guess, the benefits still come out slightly. I still enjoyed this game more than I did not enjoy. I'm not super excited. Again, it's not a game that I'm going to ask, hey, let's play. But also, when a family member says we want to play that game, then I'll be happy to play with them. It's a game that I would not initiate, but also I did not mind playing it so far, and I don't think I'll play it in the future. I just think there are pluses and minuses to this design, and there are a lot of other fillers out there that have a lot more pluses. They're simpler to play, more intuitive, and simpler to teach, and so that's just my assessment of 10. It worked in my family, at least with one of my kids. We're going to play it in the future for sure, but to me, it's a bit of a mixed bag.